It was quite strange. A few of the shops had music playing and the lights were on, and all of a sudden there was a thud. It wasn't a loud bang, it was just a dull thud. The lights flickered and died, and they probably weren't maybe 10, 20 seconds, I don't know, but it seemed a lot longer. And then it flickered, the noise started going again, and this big orange cloud lit up the sky. And my first thoughts were, shit, a gas main's exploded. I didn't think, the last thing that was in my mind was there's a bomb. I just thought it was a gas main. On the right-hand side, the Paddy's bar was well alight and people just screaming and going on. There was days people walking past me. There was one girl come past and her arm was just hanging by a scrap of skin from the elbow, and she didn't seem to be in pain. I guess she was in a state of shock. And then I looked to the left and it was just utter chaos. I raced up to the front of the Sari Club and it was just a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. There was people screaming, people on fire. I'm trying to find the boys. I couldn't see any of the boys, so I started going into the Sari Club, and there was just bodies lying everywhere. There was a couple from Maroubra, and what had happened was that the wife had been pinned by a big board, a big lodge from the waist down, and the few of the guys had tried to lift it off and couldn't do it. And I later learned that was Geraldine Buck, and her husband Steve just sat down with her and wouldn't leave her. He sat there with her. He pushed all the boys away and they all got outside, and he sat down there and held her hand, and he kind of he burnt to death with his wife, you know. And incredibly tough man to be able to sit there with that heat and just stay with his wife. I mean, that's the sort of stories that I don't think really get told, but there was there's a lot of heroes that night. A lot of people put themselves in danger.
The downtown streets of Kuta during the evening summer months in Indonesia are jam-packed with visitors from all over the world. A tourist hotspot, which once was a fishing and beach resort, now caters to young Western couples and moonlighters who are looking for extravagant discotheque entertainment on their weekend vacation getaways. The Kuta district is located as the furthermost point south of the Bali province in Indonesia, and in 2002 was also experiencing strife from within. Megawati Sukarnoputri became the 6th woman to be president in the country's history, but was clearly unprepared for the role, becoming easily overwhelmed trying to recover a failing economic GDP, as well as being dysfunctional regarding political matters. The country was also witnessing a rise in poverty, which had an alarming uptick over the last 8 years. And according to the Asian Development Bloc, the agricultural sector, which absorbs about 35% of the labor force, has consistently grown at a slower rate than the country's average GDP growth. It is harder for households at the lower end of income distribution to climb out of poverty. Since 1997, Indonesia households have faced many negative economic shocks, food price surges, and natural disasters. With the growing rates of unemployment in the public sector, militant Islam was becoming a problem for the country once again, especially for the Christian population, who were a minority, but also had a notable presence, which was seen as a threat against the nation's predominant religion to some of the Islamic fundamentalist groups. The Jemmah Islamiyah, an ultra-Orthodox Salafi, founded by Abdullah Sunkar in 1993, had started returning from the shadows after the Suharto-led secular government fell in 1998. Sunkar, along with Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, wanted the country to be led under the Sharia, an Islamic rule of law. Bashir was a known radical imam who founded the Al-Mukmin Islamic school located in the city of Surakarta. The school was labeled a boarding madrasa, which could hold up to 2,000 students between the ages of 12 and 18. In the hallways of the school, one can witness pictures of students holding AK-47s with black headbands inscribed with surahs from the Quran. One sign in a classroom would read, Death in the way of Allah is our highest aspiration. Another, live as a normal man or die as a martyr. Some of the students who were taught here would later be known for two of the worst terrorist attacks in all of Southeast Asia. Ali Amrozi bin Nurhasyim, or known as Amrozi, Huda bin Abdul Haq, known as Mukhlas, and Joni Hendarowan, known as Idris, for their participation in the 2002 Bali bombing attacks. Assam Latin Sami, Mohammed Rais, and Masrio bin Ali Umthar for their participation in the 2003 Marriott Hotel bombing. The Jemmah Islamiyah began coordinating with other jihadist organizations within the country and in the Middle East, such as Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf, and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front during the fall of 1999. With the country under economic duress, a growing Christian population, and a new inexperienced transitional government under Sukna Putri as its president, the Jemmah Islamiyah, along with the Salafi-oriented groups, began to take steps toward achieving the goal of Indonesia being led by the Quran and the Sunnah as depicted in the Hadith. One person who fervently believed in creating an Islamic government in Indonesia was Imam Samudra. Samudra was known to be a studious child while growing up in the Banten province from a well-to-do family where he had 12 other siblings. He attended junior secondary school and while here received high marks. He was quite curious about history and Indonesian mysticism. His teachers here introduced him to Salafi Islam. After graduating, he then attended the State Islamic Senior High School, where again his interest took him to history and Islamic law. After he completed his high school, Samudra was like many other young Salafi Islamists. He wished to travel to Pakistan to enter the jihad against the communist government in Afghanistan. Yet, he never saw the battlefield, not once. Instead, while in Jalalabad, he was introduced to Camp Sada, where he received guerrilla training and Wahhabi lessons from the local imams who were from the local madrasas in Islamabad. His stories about participating in jihad in Afghanistan were left questioned and at times exaggerated. He would disappear for 10 years before returning home, only to disappear once again. His family would later claim they had no idea where he was during his times he was away from home. Samudra would then travel to Malaysia, in which he would teach at a religious school south of the country in the early 1990s. The school was run by the militant Jemmah Islamiyah group under Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, the group's spiritual leader, and Ridwan Isamuddin, who went by the name de Guru Hambali. Samudra, now at the age of 32, became motivated by the Salafi ideology, and he wanted to fully radicalize Indonesia and the enemies of Islam eliminated, which were evidently the Christian and Jewish kafirs. Samudra saw what economic sanctions did to the Iraqi civilian population in 1990, as well as the US invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. He wanted revenge for the Muslim blood spilled at the hands of the Yahud, which was the Jew, and the Crusader, which were the Christian. However, just a year prior, a series of bombings on Christian churches in 2000 sent a resounding disapproval from many members of Jemmah Islamiyah. They considered the laws of the Quran regarding non-combatants as uncompromising. And according to Quran, Surah 1733, and do not kill anyone whom Allah has forbidden, except for just a just cause, and whoever is slain unjustly, we have indeed given to their authority, so let them not exceed the just limits in slaying. Surely he is aided. The bombings were authorized by Ridwan Isamuddin in return for the Christian-Muslim conflict, which saw 250 Muslims killed in 1999, just a year prior. Hambali tasked Samudra with the construction of the bombings, in which he created a small dedicated core group who were called the Badr Battalion of the Islamic Army. Samudra would sometimes construct the bombs himself, which were hidden inside Christmas gifts and left at the doors of churches. Later, in the fall of 2000, Hambali plotted to bomb U.S. embassies in Singapore, but Indonesian authorities got wind of the plot, and Hambali was forced to flee Thailand. He tasked Huda bin Abdul Haq, who went by the name Mukhlas, to lead the Jemmah Islamiyah in Samudra, Singapore, and Malaysia. Samudra had a backup plan to the foiled operation constructed by Hambali to bomb public areas where Western tourists would congregate in large numbers. Sensing the disapproval of many within Jemmah Islamiyah over the bombing of Christian churches in 1999, Samudra had to only allow a core select group to be in on the plot. Some of those members belonged to the group he once founded, the Bakar Battalion. Mukhlas was similar to Samudra in his way of thinking and approved of Samudra's plan. Mukhlas took over the primary leader of the operation, naming Samudra as the field commander. 11 others were carefully selected to be involved in this operation. Meetings between the top membership in the weeks prior to the operation were held in cities many meters away from Bali, knowing full well that their plans would be met with strict deterrence from the Jemmah Islamiyah due to their disapproval of killing civilians. Those involved with the operation included Ali Amrozi bin Hajj, Amrozi, Idris, Amran, Ali Imran, Aris Monundar, Dolmatin, Abdul Ghani, Umar Patek, and with 2 men selected as being the martyrs of the operation, Iqbal and Jimmy. Mukhlas and Samudra saw the prospect of Christians in the Indonesian land as suppressing heresy. Islam was the only way of life for these men, and so it must be preserved for the country they were born into. Bashir's teaching at the Ali Mukmin school saw the threat of apostasy that these Christian churches could bring to the populace. The Jemmah Islamiyah were also partly funded by Osama bin Laden, who by this time was the most wanted man in the world for his alleged role in the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. Samudra was in awe that a group like Al-Qaeda could bring the United States on its knees with such an easily constructed attack. His hatred for the Americans and their staunch ally, Israel, was uncompromising. He viewed the violence that plagued Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Palestinian people without any retribution as an act of fitna. The plan for a martyrdom-style operation had to be spectacular in regards to the offenses against the Ummah, or the Islamic world. In late August of 2001, both Samudra and Ali Imran started to scout potential spots that attracted Western tourists. Both men wanted to spot and bomb popular tourist spots. Both men went to a couple of the hot spots in downtown Bali before selecting Paddy's Bar and the Sari Club, located on Legion Street in the main tourist area of Kuta. According to Imran, during the trial of the suspects involved with the bombing in 2008, they selected the spots because it was frequented by Americans and their associates. He quoted Imam Samudra as saying it was part of a jihad, or holy war, to defend the people of Afghanistan from America. Over 34 people would ultimately be involved with the operation, and all those involved played specific roles, from making the bomb, purchasing the chemicals, vehicles, scouting law enforcement, and being the martyrs for the operation. Those carefully selected by Samudra and Mukhlas in charge of making the 2 bombs were Dolmatin, Abdul Ghani, Umar Patek, Ali Imran, and Idris. Idris was also in charge of gathering funds and arranging transport and accommodation for the bombers. Amrozi was tasked to purchase the chemicals used for the 2 bombs. Ali Imran, Amrozi's younger brother, would be in charge of driving the van to the street where the bar and club were, and he would then flee on a moped driven by Idris. The belt bomb, which was used for the Paddy's Bar attack, consisted of potassium chloride, aluminum powder, and sulfur. The bomb, which was placed in a 1,300-pound van purchased by Mukhlas' younger brother, Amrozi, consisted of cabinets, each containing a potassium chlorate, aluminum powder, sulfur mixture with a TNT booster, and connected by 150 meters or 490 feet of PETN-filled detonating cord. 94 RDX electric detonators were fitted to the TNT. The total weight of the bomb was 2,250 pounds. Mukhlas kept in touch with his imam and advisor, Abu Bakar Ba'asyir. Although Bashir had denied that he was ever contacted by anyone involved with the plot, much less known about the terrorist incidents. Nevertheless, the main trio of Samudra, Mukhlas, and Amrozi continued to meet in various places in the 8 weeks prior to the attacks to speak about logistics and preparation. The Jemmah Islamiyah, however, were coordinated attacks on their own against Malaysian and Indonesian targets that harbored American interests. Hambali at this time was staying in numerous safe houses during his flight from Indonesian authorities as well as U.S. authorities. The notorious orchestrator of numerous terrorist plots, Hambali, was also said to be present during a high-ranking Al-Qaeda summit meeting in Malaysia in the January of 2000. It was suspected by intelligence officials that during this meeting, the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, the USS Cole bombing were discussed, and also present were Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Khalid al-Midar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Ramzi bin al-Shib, who were all alleged to have participated in the attacks. He was still the financial conduit between Al-Qaeda and Jemaah Islamiyah, receiving funds at various non-MoneyGram locations while on the lam. Another member of Jemaah Islamiyah who was also receiving funds from the group was Nordin Muhammad Top, also known as Nordin or Top M. Nordin was also a follower of Bashir's Salafi teachings, but he, like Samudra and Mukhlas, was in opposition to the Jemmah Islamiyah's strict rules against killing civilians. His reputation for ruthlessness while being the genius behind the organization was known even to federal investigators abroad. The FBI reported that Nordin was the Jemmah Islamiyah's explosive expert, strategist, recruiter, and primary trainer. Mukhlas and Samudra wanted the bombings to take place on September 11, 2002, exactly 1 year to the date of the terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. However, the operation couldn't be completed on time. It would have to wait just a month. The plan was simple. Iqbar would wear a vest packed with TNT around his chest while walking in Patty's bar. He would detonate the explosives. Jimmy would then wait until Iqbal detonated, and in return, he would detonate the cabinet TNT bombs in the van, although there was slight mistaken in the operation, such as Jimmy being a terrible choice for the driver, making common, simple mistakes, even in training how to park a vehicle. Another almost ending to the operation entirely, while in constructing the cabinet TNT bombs, there was a slight explosion inside the house where they were moving one cabinet into the common area where there was a chemical spill. It caused a chain reaction and causing slight damage. Ali Imran would explain in a police confession about the incident. It was about 4:30 p.m. when we heard the explosion. The neighbors asked what the explosion was. Idris told them it was probably a tire burst or an exploding balloon. We stopped mixing for that night. On October 12, 2002, Ali Imran would travel to the American consulate and scout the area. He would place a small bomb hidden in the package just outside the walls of the consulate. Imran would then travel back to his house where Idris and the martyrs, Iqbal and Jimmy, were preparing themselves for the final ride. Imran checks the van. It was crammed with 14 filing cabinets packed with TNT. Imran then helps place the TNT vest on Iqbal, who by this time was sweating with nervous anticipation. Iqbal, however, knowing his fate would never waver, Imran was tasked to drive the van and park it outside the Sari Club so that no mistakes would be made, being that Jimmy was a terrible driver. Idris was on his way out of the house, finds a phone with wires sticking out, yet he doesn't realize the significance of it. Idris would drive a moped and pick up Imran after he parked the van and flee the scene after the explosions took place. At 11:30 p.m., Ali Imran drove the van out of the garage with Idris on his moped right behind, with Iqbal and Jimmy in the van. Paddy's Bar and the Sari Club that night were filling fast with patrons, mostly Australians, which was not known to the bombers. According to survivors, there was approximately 350 people in the club. Ali Imran took 27 minutes to drive 4 miles due to the weight of the cabinet bombs to the central of Kutra. He would park 100 meters short of the Sari Club. He turns and asks Jimmy if he was really ready, to which Jimmy nods and under shortness of breath says that he is. Imran exits the van, and with Idris waiting by the left side of the van, Jimmy has to stop, maneuver the van just a few clicks to have better position. The van stops just 30 meters away. Iqbal gets out, puts on the vest, and walks over to the entrance of the bar. Jimmy has the detonator switch box placed on his lap. Just 2 kilometers away, Ali Imran asks Idris for the phone number. Idris, noticing the odd question, realizes that the phone he found in the home was supposed to be attached to the truck bomb of the driver. Jimmy has second thoughts and abandoned the operation. That was a thought, that they would then detonate the bomb remotely if he did. Idris had never attached the other phone. However, they can explode the small bomb outside the American consulate. Jimmy had reached Sari's bar. With Iqbal just arriving to Paddy's Bar, Iqbal stood directly in the middle of the entrance, slowly eyeing the place, his last moments on earth. As he slowly maneuvered closer toward the bar, he reached under his flannel shirt, which was hiding the vest bomb. His last words of Allahu Akbar was reportedly heard. Seconds later, the detonation of his device was described by the surviving patrons, Jason McCartney and Peter Hughes. McCartney would say, "There was a fizzling glow of orange light flying through the air. I was knocked to the ground and was briefly blinded by the flash of light." Hughes would say, "The whole place was completely black. I tumbled and went straight up in the air, and a girl fell on me. I wasn't quite sure what happened. Why is this girl next to me? Why can't I see anything? As I was stumbling out, I realized what was underneath me. It was 2 people." The patrons in Sari Club had heard the explosion, but the music was loud, and many had thought it was simply fireworks going off. The lights inside the club flickered off just for a bit and then turned back on. Some of the dazed, charged survivors of Paddy Club had stumbled out into the streets near the club, stripped almost naked, with melted clothes on their backs. Jimmy had watched Iqbal detonate himself and exploding in the process. Now it was his turn. At 11:10 p.m., Jimmy turned on the connector switch, which was wired into the cabinets, sending the electric current into the receptors connected into the TNT switches. The blast was enormous, sending shockwaves a mile around the perimeter. Legian Street suddenly became a thick black cloud, with fires ranging from 1,000 feet from the street into the blast center. Those who survived the blast saw a glaring bright red and orange glow, and then a sonic blast which burst eardrums and sent people flying in midair and thrown 50 to 100 feet away, which followed by a deafening silence. Sari Club was in tatters. All that was left was smoky wood embers, pitch black in contorted positions like spent matchsticks, with people strewn about on the ground like dolls. A few survivors began getting up slowly, completely shocked to their core, walking clumsily in disbelief with physical distress. Hannah Beth Luke was one of the survivors of the Sari Club bombing. She was there on vacation with her boyfriend, Mark Cajardo. Cajardo had went over to the bar to order drinks. When the explosions rocked the club, Luke was thrown in midair and knocked backwards. Cajardo was killed almost immediately, as he was near the epicenter. According to Luke, she was on the dance floor while Cajardo walked over to the bar. She explains, "There was a wave of hot air and the most powerful noise. Everything was destroyed in a second. I was thrown into the air and landed on the ground. I thought my time was up for a while. Somehow I wriggled myself free from the rubble. I was intact. I managed to climb onto the roof 4 meters above using severed electrical wire, which were dropped down onto the rubble. I was all right." Luke had managed to find a bloody and shirtless young man who was bleeding about his head and chest. She asked his name. He said it was Tom. It would turn out that his name was Tom Singer, a 17-year-old from Maribor, Australia, an avid surfer. It was his first time in Bali and his first time vacationing outside of his home country. Singer would suffer severe burns over 65% of his body, with Luke managing to have his arms slung over her shoulders as they walked out together from the burning, charred remnants of the club and out into the thick, acrid black hell which surrounded them as stores, cars, and businesses were raging in flames. A photographer had happened to take one of the most iconic photos of the Bali bombings, which was posted globally soon afterwards, even making the cover of Time magazine. After 4 weeks of being under hospital care, Singer would expire from his injuries. Ali Imran and Idris then drove to the Al Gambra Mosque, just a short kilometers from the bombings, where they had met weeks prior while plotting the bombings. Idris parks the moped and leaves it behind. Both Idris and Imran planned to have the bike removed the next day by someone they knew. Both men stood laying on the floor of the mosque as they heard the sirens of ambulances and foremen rushing down the streets. What followed next is explained in an August 2005 United States Indonesian Society report. The investigators were thus able to recreate the bombers' activities. Amrozi, Idris, and Ali Imran had simply walked into a dealership and purchased a new Yamaha motorbike after asking how much they could resell it for if they returned it in a few short days. Imran used the motorbike to plant a small bomb outside the U.S. consulate. Idris then rode the motorbike as Imran drove 2 suicide bombers in the Mitsubishi to the nightclub district in Kuta. He stopped near the Saudi club, instructed one suicide bomber to put on his explosive vest and the other to arm the vehicle bomb. The first bomber headed to Patty's bar. Idris then left the second bomber, who had only learned to drive in a straight line, to drive the minivan the short distance to the Saudi club. Idris picked up Imran on the Yamaha, and duo headed back into Denpasar. Idris dialed the number of the Nokia to detonate the bomb at the consulate. The 2 suicide bombers exploded their devices. Imran and Idris dropped the motorbike at a place where he was eventually attracted the attention of the caretaker. In the immediate aftermath of the bombings, forensic investigators would locate a seat from the white Mitsubishi van which Jimmy had detonated in. Graham Ashton of the Australian Federal Police involved with the Bali bombings investigation had been told by forensics that the seat had penetrated Patty's bar and into the ceiling where the human remains of Jimmy were located. Osama bin Laden would make an audio recording praising the attacks, even blaming the death of Australians on its own government participating in their war on East Timor. You will be killed just as you kill. You will be bombed just as you bomb. Expect more that will further distress you. There were many questions over whether bin Laden had supported the attacks financially. According to Hambali, he was sent $30,000 to fund the bombings from Al-Qaeda couriers in Afghanistan. Hambali was captured on August 11, 2003, in a CIA Thailand law enforcement sting, where he was found in the city of Yaltutrahaya, where 20 uniformed and undercover police smashed down the door to his one-bedroom apartment. They were recovered firearms and explosives, as well as a fake Spanish passport. The moped left at the mosque was identified, and the members of the mosque reported to police, Idris and Ali Imran, which led them to Amrozi. When investigators found Amrozi sleeping in his house, he awakened at the sound of police entering, to which he replied rather casually, "Gosh, you guys are very clever. How did you find me?" What they found in his home was rather incriminating of his suspicion in the terrorist bombings. According to the United States Indonesian Society report, they found much more, which would literally bust the case wide open. Bags of chemical ingredients for bombs were found in his workshop, and soil samples taken from outside his home, which showed traces of the primary chemicals used in a Sari Club bomb. Police found receipts for the purchase of chemicals used to make the bombs, as well as a list of expenses incurred in making the bombs. Further, search of Amrozi's home revealed copies of speeches by Osama bin Laden and Abu Bakar Ba'asyir. The speeches exhorted listeners to wage jihad. Police also uncovered training manuals on ambush techniques and numerous articles on jihad. Under questioning, Amrozi revealed the names of 6 others involved in the bombing: Ali Imran, Imam Samudra, Dul Mateen, Idris, Abdul Ghani, and Umar Patek. But Amrozi's mobile phone proved to be the real catch. Indonesian investigators were able to print out a list of calls he had made immediately before, during, and after the bombing, as well as the names and telephone numbers in the phone's memory. Paskia kept Amrozi's arrest record for 2 days. After it was announced, Polari monitored the sudden flurry of the communications among numbers listed in Amrozi's telephone before the calls abruptly ceased. The investigators were able to identify the location of the number of the telephones, leading to a series of arrests. Imam Samudra and his personal jihad against the West were just beginning in his mind, however. The daily news reports, which now reached global interest, had now descended on the Kuta province, the light shining on the darkness which encapsulated the minds of Samudra and Mukhlas. The Salaf would be avenged, even if Australia were the majority that perished. With a total of 202 fatalities and over 209 injured, it was the second largest terrorist attack in the world, with only the terrorist attacks of September 11th having more than 3,000 fatalities. Meanwhile, the Jakarta task force was given the special case regarding the 2 masterminds behind the Bali bombings, Imam Samudra and Mukhlas. Samudra was trying to evade authorities and escape into Malaysia, but he knew it would be nearly impossible now that the entire intelligence community from all over the world would be in on the chase. On November 21st, 2002, Samudra was spotted by Jakarta task force authorities. He was on a bus at the Merak ferry terminal on the northwestern tip of Java as he waited to board a boat to neighboring Sumatra. Senior Commander Andy Charidan of the task force started in on a press briefing about Samudra's capture. He said, Samudra seemed resigned to his fate. He seemed to already know that he was going to be arrested. The tip about Samudra's whereabouts came from the arrest of 2 of his bodyguards, who knew where he would be traveling on the day of his capture, leaving only Mukhlas, also known as Ali Ghufron, as the only suspect still at large. After weeks of intense manhunts and stings, they would finally capture the elusive mastermind of the bombings. On December 4, 2002, while asleep in a safe house in Central Java province, investigator had descended into the bedroom while breaking down the back door. Like Samudra, he offered no resistance. Bali Police Chief Major General Mahdi Manku Patia held a press conference regarding the final and most important arrest of the Bali bombings case. Mukhlas, alias Ali Ghufron, has confessed to being a member of Jemmah Islamiyah. Mukhlas also told police the Bali bombings were planned in August at meetings he attended in Solo. The arrests, along with detaining over 50 subjects, led to some interesting interviews and reports about the influence of the global Islamic terror networks. Intelligence officials say Samudra was acting at the behest of Hanbali. He has also confessed to planning a series of earlier bombings in 2000, including several churches, while Mukhlas admitted he replaced Hanbali as de facto leader of the Jemmah Islamiyah in Malaysia and Indonesia. Samudra gave his reasons for the bombings to Bali investigators. He said, "Sometimes Jews and Christians are more convinced by the Quran compared to Muslims themselves. They attack Islamic nations because they are afraid of the words inside the Quran that would become a reality. So it's not about oil or nuclear issues at all. I am more convinced by the Quran rather than human analysis. So it's a matter of Aqidah or faith. Until Judgment Day comes, there will be no peace unless Islam gets the victory." Mukhlas openly confessed to masterminding the operation, while also detailing what the primary source of funding from. He would say, "I do not know for sure the source of the aforementioned money from Hanbali. Most probably it was from Afghanistan. That is, from Sheikh Osama bin Laden. As far as I know, Hanbali did not have a source of funds except for Afghanistan." However, Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, the man who schooled most of the Bali bombing suspects, the man whose Salafi studies helped shake these young men's minds and hearts to create terrorism as their religion, the man who had been watched for years by Indonesian authorities to his long-standing ties with Abdullah Sanggar, the founder of Jemmah Islamiyah, and the man who some of the Bali bombers suspects claim was the sole motivating factor and supporter of the bombings, as well as other previous terrorist attacks in the country, was finally arrested on October 19, 2002. He is suspected of not only being behind the Bali bombings, but also the bombings of the January 19, 1999 bombings of Christian churches on the Islamic holiday of Fitri, and the bombings of Christian churches in the towns of Batam, Martam, Merdan, and Mojokerto, which killed overall 18 people. He is also charged with treason and false statements to the police. The United States Department of Justice and the State Department had wanted Bashir to secretly render to be faced prosecution for its alleged ties to Al-Qaeda, but President Megawati Sukarnoputri refused due to the country already being at center stage of the Islamic world, and handing over someone as infamous as Bashir would bring unwanted fundamentalist attention for future attacks of the country. With Amrozi being shopped around for court proceedings, he became the face of the Bali bombings, constantly smiling, rather unconcerned about his disposition, shouting Islamic phrases while being shuffled by two Indonesian guards on his chairs before the court. On January 28, 2003, officials hold a press briefing and announce that Jemmah Islamiyah was behind the Bali bombings, and also announced that Bashir is the primary influence behind the motivation of the attacks. Ali Imran, who was arrested months prior, admits to his role in the attacks, and even goes on to elaborate that the civilians killed in the attacks were justified because of Australia having a tie to the United States, who was the legitimate target of terrorist attacks due to their invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. Anyone affiliated with the U.S. was considered a target for retaliation, according to Ali Imran. The lawyers defending Samudra, Mukhlas, and Amrozi knew that their clients were going to put up much of a defense. They all have admitted their roles with conviction before Indonesian authorities. It was just a matter of whether they faced the death penalty or life imprisonment for their admitted guilt. Samudra and Mukhlas were proved defiant before the courts, even shouting at supporters which were allowed at the court pews. While being transferred to the Denpasar police station, he would be heard shouting at the press who were filming the enigmatic terrorists. "Hey Bush, John Howard," the Australian Prime Minister, like this, while running his hand through his throat in a slow slashing motion. "You are next. I get gun. Gun for you. Don't forget, this is a terrorist country. Life for life. Soul for soul. I am a killer for you. As long as you kill our Muslim country, we also attack your country and your people." The following weeks of April and May would showcase their antics before the court with loud declarations and circus-like display. The jovial trio of Samudra, Amrozi, and Mukhlas before the world stage gave them an egotistical thrill, unlike they ever experienced before. They also showed their lack of empathy, which was from years and years of manipulation and the perverted teachings of the Salaf by Bashir, and from the Al-Mukmin school, and from those affiliated with it at local mosques. Their poverty-stricken areas of the Islamic world have been abused by the Saudi Gulf Wahhabi ideology since the early 1970s, and hundreds of millions of dollars poured in from the oil boom, turning former socialist Arab countries into Wahhabi-oriented provinces. Their vitriol for the West came from the teachings of older Muslim men who feared and hated the West due to outlawed texts from Sayyid Qutb and Ibn Baz, the Saudi Imam and the Grand Mufti. Imam Samudra was simply just a spoke in the wheel for the Salaf. His own world, undefined, became defined by the perversions of his people like Bashir and the Samudran, who take advantage of the impoverished youth and make them into pawns for a nefarious geopolitical game which has no true ending. All of which is anti-Islamic. The results are usually the same: insidious actions causing lives of the incident to which the Quran forbids. Because of that, we decreed upon the children of Israel that whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul on for corruption in the land, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely. And whoever saves one, it is as if he had saved mankind entirely. And our messengers had certainly come to them with clear proofs. They indeed, many of them, after that, throughout the land, were transgressors. Surat Al-Ma'idah, Sahih International. Samudra never read his part, nor likely did Mukhlas, Amrozi, Ali Imran, Idris, Jimmy, and Iqbal, or even Bashir for that matter. Or if he did, they never bothered to want to become pious Muslims, but rather purveyors of a message that there is only a perversion of Islam, one that opposes the words of the very faith itself. The true death lies not just for the 202 people who were murdered, but also in the hearts and minds of the Bali bombing operators who made death their God and life their enemy in their religion based on a perverted teachings of the Salaf, who arrogantly thought of themselves as the conduit to returning Indonesia back to the days of the Salaf, which were the first and second generations of the Prophet Muhammad. The main suspects involved with the Bali bombings would receive no reprieve. On August 7, 2003, Amrozi is found guilty of helping plan and carry out the attacks. He is sentenced to death. On September 10, 2003, Imam Samudra is found guilty of organizing attacks and sentenced to death. On September 18, 2003, Ali Imran is convicted of planning an act of terrorism and sentenced to life in prison. And on October 10, 2003, Mukhlas is sentenced to death for acting as the overall coordinator of the attacks. On March 3, 2004, an Indonesian court finds Abu Bakar Ba'asyir guilty of conspiracy over the Bali bombings, but is cleared of a more serious charge over a bombing attack at the Marriott Hotel. The judges say Ba'asyir had given his approval for the Bali bombings, and he is jailed for 2.5 years, a sentence which Australia's foreign minister described as disappointing. Ba'asyir would escape his sentence, however, and on December 21st, 2006, had his conviction for conspiracy in the 2002 Bali bombings overturned by the Supreme Court. As of 2021, Ba'asyir was released from Jakarta prison after serving 15 years for his supporting a jihad training camp located in the Aceh province. The court had released him into a de-radicalization program. He is 82 years old and has reiterated to the media that he had absolutely no connection to the Bali bombings or those involved. After menial appeals, the trio of Mukhlas, Imam Samudra, and Amrozi decide to accept their fate, and all wish to die immediately. Samudra and Amrozi wish to be killed as martyrs and to be beheaded by the state. It was refused. On November 8, 2008, all three men were executed by firing squad. The manner in which they died were chosen for them. An ironic end to the men who decided the fates of 202 people who based it on the perverted teachings of men who claimed to be descendants of the Salaf and the perverted teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah from the Hadith. They died knowing no life, while the victims of the Paddy's Bar and Sari Club died celebrating it.
They killed 202 people. They maimed many more. And for that, they were tried, found guilty, and sentenced to death. Indonesia doesn't officially announce when or where executions will take place. The 3 Bali bombers were shot by a firing squad. They had asked to be beheaded instead, arguing that decapitation by sword is a more Islamic method of execution. Imam Samudra, Ali Ghufron, also known as Mukhlas, and his brother Amrozi never expressed any regret or remorse for their part in the 2002 Bali bombings.
Guys, this is horrendous. I've never seen anything like it.
6 years ago, on the night of October 12, a suicide bomber detonated a small bomb inside Paddy's Bar on Bali's popular Kuta beach strip. As hundreds fled in panic, another bomb, more than a ton of explosives packed in a van parked outside, blew up as well. Every year, there are memorial services to remember the victims, mostly Western tourists, including 88 Australians.
I remember when the bomb went off like it was yesterday. I sometimes wonder why I got out of the club that night and why I wasn't left there. I always think, what if I still had my mum? Or what if I still had my dad? Would it have been any easier for me if I had one parent? I will never know.
Many were outraged by the bombers' lack of contrition. One of them, Amrozi, became known as the Smiling Bomber. He seemed delighted when he was sentenced to die. And in an earlier interview, the mother of Amrozi and Mukhlas said her sons didn't do anything wrong.
They are not guilty. They have killed men and women who were sinful, who were engaging in free sex. So there is nothing wrong with their struggle. They killed unbelievers. That's what I heard.
Imam Samudra, Mukhlas, and Amrozi are now dead. A monument stands where their victims were cut down, a reminder of a darker time in Bali and for tourists who've now returned in strength to the island's sunny beaches. David Hawk.